average Christian, and I think a lot of people resonate with this, is overworked, overcommitted, and overscheduled, and that's before they even get to church. The average local church is overprogrammed, overscheduled, and overextended. That's before they even get to the Great Commission. Why do you think that's the case? And how do you think, or let's go back, how did the Oikos principle change your understanding of how the church to function? Because in many ways, what I'm hearing you say is this Oikos principle transformed me. It transformed my view of church so that it wouldn't become this overprogrammed, overhyped. We are just trying to live this out in the community in which we live. Is that what happened? Or how did you go about understanding how this would play out? Or just go back to my original question. How did it change your view of the church? Let's just go there. How did it change your view of the church?
Well, it reminded me, and I think clarified for me, how Jesus gave us one thing to do between his advents. He gave us one thing to do.
Make disciples.
And make disciples. And that's, have you ever, and you're a married man, Travis, have you ever got that look from your wife that said, I gave you one thing to remember and you couldn't even remember one thing? Can you imagine?
I got that 20 minutes before I got on this interview.
Can you imagine? And our wife loves us, and I know Jesus loves us. Jesus loves us even more. But can you imagine standing in front of the Bema seat and Jesus giving you that same look saying, Travis, I gave you one thing to remember, and you couldn't remember one thing. We call it nobody ever calls it the Good Commission. But we do so many good things at church that the gospel becomes marginalized because the Great Commission becomes lost in this morass of good initiatives. To me, and I know I'm speaking in general terms, so I recognize there are so many layers to this conversation, but just because we're speaking to a general audience today, I just ask the question, are your people, the people who come on the weekend to your church, are they really energized and ready to go? Or are they exhausted? I find, and I know I'm speaking anecdotally, I find people are tired. They are not coming to church looking for something to do. Nobody comes to church looking for something to do. They're coming to church to get help. That's why I looked at myself as not a big box store a few minutes ago. That's not my store. That's not my church. I know that's the title of the book, not my church. That's a very subtle plug. We call it product. So when people come to HTC, they're not saying, hey, Tom, I got some, my wife and I were just sitting around this week wondering, what are we going to do with our spare time next week? Is there something you can give us to do? I mean, and yet pastors oftentimes they can structure their ministries assuming that people are excited to just do whatever we tell them is good. And they're not. And so we throw it out there this way. We get mad then because they don't cooperate with all of these initiatives. And then we get all petty and we take it personally and we say, listen, with God, it's all or nothing, right? And everybody in the room says, yeah, that's true. With God, it's all or nothing. But since I can't do your all, Tom, I'll take the other option you just gave me, and I'm not going to do anything. And so we got to take that all, and we got to frame that all the way Jesus did. It's the Great Commission. That's all. When he gave it to us, Matthew 28, it's a great passage. The Lord knows my heart. I love all of the passages he wrote. But so if the microphone goes dead, it's because the Lord's offended by something I said. But Matthew 28, Jesus said, go. And make disciples is the main verb of that statement. Go frames it. The Great Commission, and I write about this in Not My Church, the Great Commission is an assumption we're going somewhere. Jesus is essentially telling us, okay, fellas, I know you're going to go somewhere. So as you go, you now take this gospel of redemption to people. And And, following Jesus is not just attending a church. Following Jesus is seeing your world through this lens of as you go. Okay, so I would ask a weekend audience, where are you going this week? Because as you go, we're going to make disciples. So as they go, they're going to encounter a lot of people. But 8 to 15 of them are going to be watching and listening most closely. And that is the group statistically that is most receptive to the gospel. So now we have framed our strategies around this idea of the 95. I do just ask from the stage. It's not like I engage these guys all in personal conversations.